Well, unless they've got slides. Yeah. Good morning. My name is David Cadman. I'm a recovering Vancouver politician. I'm going to invite all of our people to come to the stage so that we don't lose time. It's a pretty tight schedule. And our youth intervention, Xiye Bastida, is already online and ready to go. So if I can call up Kelley, Veronica Bylicki, Gerben van Straaten, Eric Asadurian, Charlene Alec, Ben West, Jeff Cross, Jerry Dobrevoni, and I think that's it. And while you all get seated here, I'm gonna just go through the bios quickly, or do I go first of all to the youth intervention? Youth intervention first. So do the bios first. Okay. So the people we have with us today are Xiye Bastida from the Otomi-Toltec Nation in Mexico, and one of the workers on the Fridays for Future City organizer, and the Fridays for Future Youth Climate Strike Movement. She's on the administrative committee of the People's Climate Movement, and she brings the voice of grassroots and climate organizations. She's going to be the person who's going to be, yes, on screen shortly. We've also got Kelley, the General Manager of Planning and Urban Design and Sustainability, an internationally recognized urban strategist. We've got Veronica Bylicki, the Youth Caucus on the International Ecocity Standards and Call for Action, a co-founder and co-director of Citywide, the Transform the Way the young people are engaged, a lifelong Vancouverite. She specializes in urban sustainability policy and planning and in environmental assessment with the Environment and Climate Change Canada and director at Co-Design Engage. And she was, in 2015, the top 25 under 25 Environment of Canada. And she's done a TED Talk, and she serves on the Vancouver City Planning Commission. We've also got Eric Asadurian of the World Watch Institute. He's a senior fellow with the World Watch Institute. For 18 years with World Watch, he directed 2 editions of Vital Science, 5 editions of State of the World, and the most recent report, Earth Ed, Rethinking Education on Changing Planet, and is an adjunct professor at Goucher College in their Environmental Studies Master's Program. We also have Charlene Alec, former councillor of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, spokesperson for the Tsleil-Waututh Sacred Trust Initiative, and she is the granddaughter of Chief Dan George. She served 3 terms as an elected council for the Tsleil-Waututh, and now is working on the Sacred Trust Initiative, an arm of the Tsleil-Waututh Lands and Resource Department. And its purpose is to oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. We've got Ben West, who comes from E-Democracy Solutions and Elephant in the Room. He's the executive director. He is the co-director of the Carbon Budget Project, the founder of the Elephant in the Room Communications, chair of the Great Climate Race, Healthy Communities campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, campaign director for Forest Ethics, communications coordinator for the Tsleil-Waututh Nation Sacred Trust Initiative. We've got Jeff Cross, Vice President Planning and Policy with Translink. and encompasses planning, funding, and operating of transit, major roads, bridges, and cycling at the regional level. He's responsible for developing the region long-term strategy and the 2014 Mayor's Vision, a $9 billion multimodal expansion. And it also includes regional goods movement strategy, mobility and fair pricing, and new mobility services. And we've got Jerry DeBravoni, the outgoing, very outgoing, yes, General Manager of Engineering Services, the City of Vancouver, and incoming Chief Administrative Officer at Metro Vancouver. He's responsible for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the city's public works infrastructure, 1,900 engineering services staff. He's also worked for the City of Vancouver for 30 years, and he's a city councillor, was a city councillor for 9 years in the city of New Westminster, and played football for 5 years. Go figure. I think those are all of our panelists that are here. And so now I'm going to, I don't know what I do. I say, is Xiye Bastida here? Can we get her on the screen? Okay, over to you, Xiye.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm hearing all the panelists, the amazing panelists, and I'm so glad that this space has been open to me. So, hi everyone, my name is Xiye Bastida. I am 17 years old, and I am with Fridays for Future. I'm a climate justice activist. So I'm going to talk about a few things today. First, I'm going to talk about the work that youth are doing in the climate movement. Then I'm going to talk about the role of Indigenous people in the movement. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the role of women. So, as you all know, the youth movement really started when Greta Thunberg started striking outside of her Swedish parliament every single Friday to demand climate action. From there, the youth movement exploded. And now it's international. It's happening all over the world. Right after this conference, I'm going to go to strike outside of the UN headquarters here in New York City. So it's really become something that is building momentum and is laying the platform to bring awareness. So we started organizing global climate strikes. Our first global climate strike on March 15th was 1.6 million people worldwide. On May 24th, we had 1.9 million students. And on September 20th, we had 7.6 million people striking with us worldwide. So at first, a million people is a lot, but 7 million, it's really saying we are here to stay and we're here to grow. And the difference of September 20th was that we made the strike intergenerational because we recognize that the climate crisis is a generational issue because it's going to affect youth the most. But it requires intergenerational cooperation. And that is because we as youth cannot vote. We cannot make our voices heard in the sense that you can. So we are saying, you have to listen to us. We're going to open our space for you to raise your voice because we want you to open your space for us to have a voice. So when adults ask us, how can we support? This is what we mean. Opening your platforms to make our voices heard. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to vote when the time to vote comes. We will be there and we will get out the youth vote because we know how important that is. Thanks to our activism and all the work that we've been doing, we've gotten really big recognitions such as the Amnesty Award and the Champions of the Earth Award by the United Nations. But awards are just marking not that we've reached our goal, but that we are getting there, and it's highlighting all the catalysts that we've been able to activate. And I think that the power of the youth movement comes from us really tackling every sector. So we tackle the education sector, the policy sector, Fridays for Future is there every single Friday. So that is the consistency sector. We have 0 Hour, which is racial justice and tackles environmental racism. And Sunrise Movement tackles policy. And the most important thing we have is how intersectional this movement is, because it is international. It is inviting everyone from all over the world to join and do what they do best in order to support the movement. Right now, I'm sure you've heard about Extinction Rebellion and the global rebellion that is going on right now. That is thousands of rebels all around the world who are getting arrested to demand climate action and to highlight the issue that's going on. So now I'm gonna move on to the Indigenous Peoples part of it, because we know that the environmental movement did not start with us youth, did not start 60 years ago when Greenpeace or Sierra Club were founded, but the environmental movement has always been here, because Indigenous people have been taking care of the earth for thousands of years, and it's part of their culture. They don't do it because it's a movement or it has momentum. They do it because it's their way of life. And that is what I want out of this pressure and these strikes, that taking care of the earth is not something that we choose to do 1 year or two, but it's something that we live with. And me, I am Otomi, which is an indigenous group in Mexico, in the highlands of Mexico. So the way in which I was raised was that you take care of the earth because the earth takes care of you. And you need reciprocity. If the earth gives you life, you have to give life back. And I know that this conference is about cities. And it's so important to listen to Indigenous voices when doing your city planning for several reasons. The first one is that, in my own town in Mexico, it's called San Pedro Toltec, there was this development group that wanted to build a university. And the indigenous people of the land said, you cannot build a university here because the land is not going to sustain it. But they did it either way without listening to the indigenous knowledge. And now the university is sunk into the earth because it was an aquifer and it was not stable enough to stand this, 7-story building. And I'm sure you know how important it is to measure the land and see how it works. But to hear the knowledge, to hear what indigenous people have to say is so crucial, because they are the ones who have been taking care of the earth and living in peace with the earth during all this time. Another point is the loss of culture. When all these natural disasters come and when cities come, you risk losing traditions and losing culture when everything is wiped out. So when there is rebuilding of cities, you have to remember what these cities were founded on, what is the foundation of these cities, so that you can build up respecting the culture and respecting the traditions and highlighting the richness of the biodiversity and the richness of the things that have been accumulating for thousands of years. And the youth in all these sectors that we're tackling will be there because we are trusting you to keep moving forward, and you can trust us to keep putting pressure on our governments and on our institutions. And I guess the last thing that I want to talk about is the role of women, because we know that a lot of the young activists today are women. I can point to so many amazing people who have been working in the climate justice movement for only 1 or 2 years, but they've taken leadership roles that are so important, such as Greta Thunberg and Jamie Margolin, Alexandria Villaseñor. I could go on and on and on. And I think that the reason why there are so many young girls stepping up is because we are protecting Mother Earth, and we understand the connection that a mother has to its children. And we are saying, this is not only about plastic straws and light bulbs, this is about people's lives. Environmental disasters, the effects of air pollution, water pollution, and plastic pollution are harming all of us. And now, more than ever, I think that my generation is not afraid to say, we need to bring back love, and we need to bring back morality into all of our decisions, because it's been too desensitized from everything that we do. And that is what we're bringing, the heart. We're bringing the passion. We're bringing the foundation that has always needed to be there. We need to bring back humanity into everything we do. And right now, I know I'm speaking to people who understand a lot of these things. So it is about how each one of us can reach different groups of people. Because when you are in the environmental movement, you know what's going on at all times. But when you step outside, you know that people are not always aware. So it is our job, it is our responsibility as people who are knowledgeable and people who are free to make others free and to educate others. And so my call to action is obviously to act as much as you can, because we are doing a lot, but we're not doing enough. Right now, I'm in school. I missed half of my French class to give my message, but I know how important it is. I've been skipping school most Fridays for 14 weeks today to strike outside of the United Nations, to demand action. And we're doing it because it is our future, but not only our future, is our presence. And we are seeing how all these different beautiful spaces on Earth are getting affected. And we are not being able to keep up. We are spending too much time debating whether this is real or not. We're spending too much time talking about how to tackle it best. And the solutions are here. I saw the backdrop of Drawdown before, and Drawdown really shows you that the solutions are here. All we have to do is implement them. So I want to thank all of you for making that more possible than it would be. And I want to encourage you to do more than you can, because everything that you care about is going to be affected by the climate crisis. And at the same time, everything that you are passionate about, you can use to bring awareness and to implement action. So thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that you know that the youth are here to stay, and we won't let you not keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiye. Thank you to all the youth who do what you do. We really appreciate the momentum that you have driven in the last little while. I'm going to now turn it over to Gil Kelley, the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability on Citywide Plan, to respond.
Thank you. It's a tall order to respond to you, Xiye. Thank you, Xiye, for your urgent call for love, compassion, and care for the earth. In fact, we are at a moment of survival, and please keep the pressure on us. I can't wait until your generation votes, but in the meantime, please do keep the pressure on us. Thank you for your remarks this morning, Xiye, and we will take your message to heart. I was walking here this morning, actually, walking and taking the electric train, so I rarely drive any longer. And an old tune of Joni Mitchell's, a great Canadian songwriter and musician and poet, kept drifting into my mind. And the refrain that I was recalling was, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Pave paradise, put up a parking lot. And for me, that was one of those tunes when I was coming of age, Xiye's age and a bit older, in the 60s and 70s. And the reason I bring that up is because it was the insistence of youth and young people that essentially reframed society. And that was so powerful for anti-war movement, for civil rights, for women's rights, for the nascent environmental movement at the time, for LGBT rights. It was huge. And it wasn't the people in power, it wasn't the experts leading the way, it was the voice and insistence of youth. And I'm recalling in Xiye's remarks this morning how that felt. So please, go on with it, Xiye, go on, Greta. You are leading the way. You truly are leading the way. We here in this room are all experts and professionals. We're here to support you. We've had our turn at leadership, and I think in many ways we've done great things, but we have also failed the planet. And so we are now in a position to support your voice, to welcome you to our platform as you insisted, and accept warmly the invitation to your table that you've made the invitation for this morning. I think if I say nothing else this morning, it's that, which is that we should put all of our brains, all of our technical expertise, and all of our passion to this urgent moment that Xiye and Greta and others have articulated so well. It is a matter of survival. If those words of Joni Mitchell sound wistful in a way, now it is about absolute survival. And we need to heed that call. And so I would say in our own way, for the city of Vancouver, which has done so well on many climate issues, we have much, much more to do, much more aggressively. And harnessing that notion of new voices, of a diversity of community, of forward-looking, positive-looking focus on health and well-being of people and the planet is exactly the thesis of our upcoming first ever citywide plan for Vancouver. We've done a great job of neighborhood scale planning, of infrastructure planning. This is the time to invite a community conversation that asks in the first instance, what do you care about and what do you propose to do? And we want to ask that of every school, every neighborhood, every business, every social group, every club, every institution. My guess is in our early listening phase, which will begin next month and continue into the spring, we will hear awareness, growing awareness and insistence around addressing climate change. And I think that is a unifying factor. Our city council in Vancouver has already declared some very aggressive 6 big moves to address climate change, from sort of complete walkable communities to electrification of the entire vehicle fleet for the city, replanting and care for the forests that surround us, a whole number of issues that are really essential. And those are not afterthoughts, those need to be central to what we do. And the importance of cities, I would say, Xiye, is that over half the world's population now lives in cities, and in a few years it will be 75%. Already 75% of wealth is created in city. 75% of GHG emissions are produced by cities and their populations. And 75%, at least I would posit, of innovation occurs in cities. And is that innovation, that bringing together of community to forward our thoughts in this way, that will be the savior of the planet. And so we cannot rely on national governments, on provincial governments to lead the way. They also will be support in this. But that leadership has to come from urban populations, from the next generation, and the rest of us need to be in support of that. So we will be doing a citywide plan for Vancouver. We're calling it, I'm announcing today, the Vancouver Plan, just to make it really clear to people what it is. It is the plan, and it is the guide for the next 30 years of this city in many, many respects, whether it's economic, social, or environmental. I believe very firmly that Vancouver and the Vancouver region can lead the way globally to demonstrate what that new model is for urban living that is responsible to the earth, that is responsible to the indigenous population, that is responsible to the energy and the creativity of youth and of all of us. And to me, the reason I'm still here with Joni Mitchell rattling in my head is the commitment to do that effort in the most powerful and genuine way that we can. And so just today, I just wanted to let you know we all are initiating that planning effort beginning next month, and it will grow and grow. And we hope that there will be many signatories to that effort, not simply the City Council, but many of the groups and organizations that are going to have to help make that a reality over the next several years. And that will not be a series of incremental changes. It's really meant to focus on the kind of transformative change that Xiye has indicated that is necessary. The old way of thinking doesn't work, folks. And so here's an idea to formalize and commit ourselves to a real transformation. We no longer have the luxury of time to make kind of gentle progress, sometimes sideways, sometimes forward. We have to go directly forward in a very aggressive direction to meet these challenges. So thank you, Xiye, for your inspiration this morning. We'd like to follow through and invite you here and have us heed your words and develop a very, very robust future vision for Vancouver that includes all of the things you talked about. We have a very deep heritage here of First Nations heritage, and the wisdom of the Coast Salish will be brought into that effort. It is really, really a major foundation we have to build on. The wisdom of millennia need to come back into focus in our work here. So again, thank you very much, and I'll conclude my remarks and turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Xiye. Thank you, Gil. We're at an existential moment. To quote Shakespeare, to be or not to be. That is the question, and the time is now. I'd like to now call on the Youth Caucus representatives. So that's Veronica and Ellison. Do you want to speak from the table or speak at the, do you have slides?
Yes, we do.
Go there.
Okay.
Greens forward, reds backwards.
Okay, got it.
Both of you going to stand up here together?
Yeah. I can even adjust it, right? Okay, great, thanks for having us. And I think the question is even more so to act or not to act, or to do or not to do. And thanks both to Gil and to Xiye for setting the ground so well for us to share some of what came up at a session that we held yesterday at an idea jam. So I'm Veronica, and I'm the executive director and co-founder of Citywide. And then we have Allison Herbert, who attended the session yesterday and will be reporting out on what came out of that. And so the future of cities, I think for me, that's something that keeps me up at night and also clearly gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think that probably resonates for a lot of you too. And for me, what brought me into this space was two experiences that I had growing up. One was I got to attend or be part of an outdoor education program in high school where I got to attend a UN Habitat Day. And that for me, it was a local event here, but it really connected the dots between what was happening globally and what was happening in my backyard. But more impactful, the experience that got me to really care about urban sustainability in cities, the future of our cities, was an experience growing up in a neighborhood that transformed quite quickly while I was growing up. And there are lots of proposals for my neighborhood to really transform in a few years. And so I started to show up to open houses and consultation sessions. And I think in my youthful naivete, wrote down a lot of ideas and was really excited. And my experience was really putting them down on a slip of paper, slipping them into a suggestion box, never to be seen again. And I think that for me was a really impactful experience growing up and thinking about how do we actually engage the communities that are transforming in shaping what they look like in the future. But also often at those open houses, I would be the youngest person in the room by a few decades. And so for me, I think that was a really formative experience in thinking about how do we actually engage young people in the conversations about the future of the places that they live. And so that's what really guides the work that we do at Citywide. Our mission is to transform the way that young people are engaged in shaping their cities, and that's in particular in planning, in decision making, and in tackling urban sustainability challenges. And so we work both with cities and local governments and organizations to help them engage youth, but also run civic education programs so that youth can learn about how their cities actually work. And that's what brought us here to Ecocity in conversations with Jenny Moore and Ecocity, and thinking about how do we engage youth in shaping what the Ecocity standards look like and really embed a youth perspective in that. And so we held a session yesterday here at the summit, a youth idea jam. And then we also held another session in partnership with the City of Vancouver's sustainability team on Wednesday with youth locally who aren't attending the summit, and with the framing of the city's work around the climate emergency and the next step of the greenest city work. And so there are some overarching themes that came out from both of those idea jams. And what they looked like, in particular the one yesterday, was the first thing we asked was, what does your vision of a sustainable city look like? What does it feel like? What are you doing? What's your way of life? And based on that, we almost came up with our own set of standards. And then we heard from Kirsten Miller from Ecocity about what the standards are, and almost put the two against each other, saying what resonated between the two, but what's missing, and what can be improved and brought more into the standards. And so I'll pass it on to Allison to share some of the ideas that were brought up from that.
Hello, my name is Allison Herbert, and I am actually a JIS intern for Ecocity Builders. We were tasked initially with evaluating the Ecocity standards and really seeing what is missing, but I believe that what we found can be applied to multiple frameworks and discussions that we've heard this week. So just keep that in mind as we move forward, please. So the first thing we noticed was what really resonated with us, and that was the themes that were shared with the standards as well as other presentations that were brought up this week, particularly access by proximity, the walkability issues that are really needed for the city so that everyone has access to food, transportation, places to work. And we found that the systems-based approach was a great starting point. The strong use of quantitative measures are great for the beginning of an evaluation of a city. But we also found that sociocultural indicators can't necessarily be measured with these quantitative methods. It really takes a more qualitative approach, and that requires really in-depth community analysis, going into the community and seeing what they think about their city. So with that, there are ways that these standards can be improved, particularly we really looked at the equity and accessibility of these standards in terms of who are these standards really focused on? Are they focused on the top levels of society in these cities, as well as who approaches these standards? And can these be looked at from a more holistic perspective, which we can go into a little later. Furthermore, the language used in the standards really needs to be focused, because oftentimes, well, now we live in a society where climate change is so politicized that every type of language we use really has to have a deeper meaning behind it. For example, we brought up that carrying capacity in the United States and many academic fields has a very negative connotation. Many use it to talk about the sustainability of resources, but we also need to acknowledge that this has a history of persecution for certain groups of people in the United States, and many academic fields feel that way. Furthermore, we found that a particular standard that could be utilized better with all cities is adaptability and resiliency. So, do these cities have plans for impending climate change? And do they have an option do they have a response plan to any type of natural disaster? These are really important questions that we need to look at for sustainable cities, because if a natural disaster comes along and ruins the city, then it's really not a sustainable city. It's going to be gone, unfortunately. More than that, we need to look at if they're willing to transition, if they're willing to work harder to become more sustainable by working with their citizens. Now, to go back to the equity and accessibility theme, we really wanted to focus on the fact that all voices need to be represented when you are looking at a city, specifically if you are evaluating how sustainable it is. Because oftentimes, these standards are looked at through the framework of Western voices, a Western lens. But we need a formal procedure that requires us to look at it from other points of view, particularly those who are most disenfranchised, women, disabled, Indigenous peoples, the lowest of the low. I mean, we just have to make sure that we can make sure that everyone is getting an equal share in the community. Otherwise, you cannot say that your city is sustainable if you're focusing on one group. Particularly, we found that children are the most left out of this discussion because they do not have a voice at the table. But children can be the best indicator of how vibrant a city is, how the city will move forward. And focusing on our youth is the best way to incorporate, I think, a wider range of individuals into our discussions about city sustainability. Sorry, I'm running out of time. But I wish we had more time to discuss the depth of conversation that we had yesterday because it was very enlightening, and I just want to make sure that everyone has a good idea of the type of more intersectionality that's needed in all of these discussions. Thank you very much.
And so building on what was heard yesterday and really building on what Xiye shared as well, we have a call to action that we came up with collectively. That's to think about the spaces that you occupy and how you can embed and include youth voices in them. And we've all heard of Greta, of course, and there's other really inspiring, as she said, in particular young women climate activists all around the world. So think about who it is in your city. Here in Vancouver, we have the Sustainability teens who led the climate march that had 100,000 people show up. And so think about who those youth are where you're at, and think about how you can engage them early on and often and in a meaningful way. Thanks.
Thank you, Veronica and Allison. I'd now like to call on Gerben van Straaten, the CEO of World Wallace, the future of cities walking the Wallace way.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here on this gorgeous day outside. The terrain where Expo 86 started, and that's actually where I started my career in urban development. I came from the university. They were looking for project managers, and that's how I ended up here. I'm still here, traveling too much to be sustainable, but I'll explain that a little bit. I would really like to start my presentation with recognizing Charlene Alec and representing Aishka, representing the Coast Salish nations. We're on their unceded territory. I have great respect for your history and your culture. So I think that's a good thing to start. And it also defines us a little bit, because I also like to recognize the Kwakwaka'wakw people who I started to work with at this location. And after that, we really kept on working with them. We did 60 projects for Indigenous peoples all around the world, and we slowly moved into urban development together. A woman from the Kwakwaka'wakw nation, the Namgis nation, Andrea Sanborn, started the company with me, and one of the families from Allard Bay, where this group is, they adopted me in their family and gave me the name Wallace Giladzi, and we took that name for our company. Andrea is not with us here anymore, but at this location where everything started, I would really like to recognize her and the Namgis nations, all First Nations in Canada and all around the world, because they're very dear to me, and we carry that in our name. What I said is this is the Kwakwaka'wakw peoples, and the Namgis are the third tribe, and that's the tribe that I worked with. And Namgis means, Nam means one, Is means from the sea. So the first peoples that came from the sea, and that resonates to me too. And I'll explain a little bit later. So when we started the company with Andrea, we were small. At this point, we really focused on sustainable urban development, radically since 10 years ago, because we really believed in sustainable action. Our company grew all over the world. It's about 30 corporations now, very different. And I want to take you into our world of thinking and how we address projects in cities, and I hope that will resonate to what we can do in any city, I believe. Who recognizes this? Are you Dutch? So I'm from Holland originally, and I think that gives us a different flavor. You know, if you're from Holland, you know that we're for 2,000 years, we're 40% below sea level. And, you know, that requires a certain way of addressing problems, because it really does not help if you build a dike in front of your own house. You know, if the neighbors don't have a dike, you will still drown. If the next village don't build their dikes, you still drown. If the whole area doesn't still build the dikes, you will still drown. So you have to collaborate. You have to work on talking to other people. You have to build community. You really have to think about what you're doing together. You know, and this stage, you know, we used to be 40% below sea level, but with the climate change, we're going up to 60% below sea level. That's the light blue that you see here. And I believe that at this point, we're not just below sea levels. We're below a lot of levels that flow. We're below carbon levels, fine dust levels, and it really doesn't help if we build a dike in front of our own house. You know, if Canada does its own thing, but the southern neighbors are not building their dike, it's useless. We have to collaborate, and we have to make sure that we all pull together. That's why I call it collaborate or die. That's from Holland, because it's literally the case for us, and I believe more and more so for everybody. And we're talking about cities today. This is an old number from the UN. About 200,000 people a day now leave a rural area and go into an urban area. You know, the definition of urban areas or cities are a little bit different, but we really believe that about 85% of people will live in urban areas in some time in the next 30 years. The funny thing is 2/3 of all people live in this small circle. And if you really look in how we use energy at night, there's something wrong with this picture. So again, we have to collaborate to make sure that things are just better and better divided. And this is also where equity and equality comes in place. 85% of the planet living in urban areas means that we have to make sure that they have a good life. They have to live there, they have to find their dwellings there, we have to go to work and we have to work there. We want to leave nobody behind, so you know, we have to find work for everybody. Of course, we need health and we need sufficient food in cities, which is a big challenge. We need safety, of course. We have to look to protect ourselves from nature. Nature is more and more strong in climate. You know, we have to come up with a lot of different solutions. I heard from Al Gore that, you know, it was 15 years ago, and about once a month we had climate stress in the newspapers. At this point, it's once a day. So, you know, things are really happening. And if you're talking about safety in cities, it's not just about protecting us against nature, but also protecting us from each other. More and more, that's in the news every day as well. So in cities, we need to solve that. We need clean air. This is a picture from China. I worked with the city of Beijing at some point, and their target is the blue sky policy, which means they really like to achieve a moment in the next 10 years where they can see the blue sky 3 days in a row. So imagine that if you're in Vancouver and you just walked outside into this a little bit darker place. That's a reality in big parts of the world. We're still dealing with fossil fuels, and we have to get rid of those and find new solutions. And all these topics are very important for us. And I'll take you into our world to see how we think and how we deal with that. And you know, since we started to be more sustainable, I've been in urban development for 25 years now, and we had to be really disruptive. We really had to fight our way in almost like street fighters to really make sure that we can do things differently. You know, it's against planners, it's against banks. Everybody is in a certain way of building cities, and what they really mean is building real estate. And that's not the same for us. Cities are about people. We want to think about how everybody lives, how we can collaborate, how we build communities, because the future of cities, that is where a lot of critical mass is. I believe that's the future of us all, and we'd like to think and work with everybody to see how tomorrow will look like. And what I said, cities are about people, and I don't know if you recognize most of the people here, but these are always also people that influenced us, and I'd just like to take them into my talk at this point, explain a little bit more. I worked with all of them, shook their hands, had the opportunity to work with them, except for Greta Thunberg. Maybe I get the chance in the future. But I'd really like to explain a little bit more about how they influenced us and how they influenced the work in cities. And our approach is multi-tier. If you look at this, then, for us, why, how, what is very important. We really had to think about why we do things. I'll explain that a little bit more. If you really look how Al Gore translated this, it is about must we change, can we change, and will we change? That's important for us too. And we sort of organized our company around these questions. So let's start with must we change? With everything we heard this morning, for me, that's not a question anymore, and 15 years ago, it was not a question anymore. We really want to go to action. So we're part of a lot of movements where we go into the world and try to inspire people like today to be part of a movement to really get things done. I really admire Al Gore's movement. I'm wearing the pin of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps today. Because I think he created a great movement to get us forward, to think about climate and that we have to make change. And again, big recognition, not making the Nobel Prize today, sort of a pity, but I think she's right. There's a lot of controversy around her, but not with me. I really apologize to the next generation here on the table because we did not do a good job. I took over from my parents who came from the Second World War. I can't blame them too much. They had to rebuild this earth. I'm the lucky generation. Everything was riding for me, and we did not do a good job. So I realized that a couple of years ago when I started to be in sustainable urban development, and we all have to apologize to the next generation and try to build action and get things done. And until you vote, we have to represent you and do that better. So I really recommend Greta Thunberg for doing that things. Our big why is in the Earth Charter. If you've never heard about the Earth Charter, just look it up. 16 principles about sustainability, not about technology only, but also about social sustainability, about governance, about equality, about indigenous rights. This year their topic is indigenous rights, so it's really interesting to look it up. There was a big movement where important people were driving a people's document. 500,000 people in the world co-wrote it. Ruud Lubbers, Prime Minister from Holland for 12 years, was one of the drivers in that, together with Maurice Strong, Stephen Rockefeller, Mikhail Gorbachev, Desmond Tutu. Those are the names that were driving this. Ruud Lubbers just got me into this movement. The Earth Charter was launched in 2000. This whole movement also caused the climate conferences, the SDGs, a very important document for the United Nations. For some parts, they have said this is our highest ethical base. And this group of people asked me to adapt it to cities and build it to a little bit more action, which we did in the Earth Charter Cities Manifesto, where we took all the Earth Charter principles and tried to match them with good practice of urban development. And for me, it's also important that we really think about our Earth. It's about the rights of the Earth. This week there was a lot of news about Elon Musk saying, we should actually become an interplanetary species. But I don't think so. I really think it is Earth first, mission Earth first. The Earth has so much to offer if we listen better to it, if we try to understand better. We can get in such better relation with Earth and to provide for us all, and that's also where our hope is. And not just to take care of our house, but also to take care of our people. We really believe in the name Oikos, the connections that we are building together in the community. But, let's think about Earth first. Let's take care of it a little bit more. And, you can do that very different ways. Mikhail Gorbachev was in the Earth Charter, and he taught me one thing, and I really took that to heart, and he said, technical sustainability is the only sustainability that's not sustainable. That's also why I wrestle long-term planning from cities sometimes. If there's a plan or if there's a certification, new technologies of tomorrow might, bypass you. And if there's no access for new technologies, I'm not sure we always do the right thing. I also believe that real sustainability is not just in technical solutions, it's also in the social and community solutions that we have to build together. So that's what I'd like to drive. And it's also an opening to talk about, can we change? And for us, that is about access to innovations. If I really look at this guy that I also met, he won a Nobel Prize in 1969. 15 years later, I was an economist in university. I met him, and his Nobel Prize winning rule was, for each and every policy, we must at least create one policy tool. So it's nice that cities build policies, but if you don't think about tool creation or the instruments to really make them happen, they're meaningless. And we're about trying to give tools to policies. So when we're on global stage, we work with policy creation. We are asked to help with policies, but I always say, you have to give us the access to tools or the access to create tools for you. That's what we're trying to do, and innovations for us are very important. So we invest in innovations. We try to reach out to innovation. We build big networks of innovation groups. We have a small innovation center in Vancouver, in Francis Street, and East Vancouver. It used to be downtown. And there's a lot of things that we also invest in because you need innovations for sustainable cities. These are some of the weird things, and I will talk about them a little bit before I show you how we actually deal with projects. So IPM system means, how do we control creating food in cities? We really like to do urban farming, bring food into cities, food creation into buildings, but you have to do very different things in pest control, so you have to invest in that and research that. It cannot be chemical, it cannot be all kinds of biological, so you have to be very specific to be able to recreate ecosystems in cities as well. We really believe in the future of algae, and I'll explain that a little bit. We're in green walls, we're in ecoponics. We do a lot of things where we think we can really create better systems for cities. And if you do this, you also gain a lot in logistics and sustainability. If your food is closer by, you don't need to move it around. There's a big sustainability effects there as well. Ecoponics, we call it, or aquaponics, that's what we use in our buildings. I will talk about that a little bit more. It looks like this, but basically in part of a building you can grow fish. In another part of the building you can grow plants. The plants eat the waste of the fish eat the waste of the plants. You can tweak it a little bit. It's a very healthy and good system. The food quality is much higher than you actually get from a regular production. You can get it close by, and people that live in those buildings can eat it. You don't have to transport it. They find jobs in this when you do it. So it's actually a very great thing to work at. And we love that. And the other example that I'd like to be in is algae. The future of algae, that's something that we really believe in. The great thing of algae is they eat one thing that we don't like, and that's carbon dioxide. That's the only thing they need, and sunlight. If they eat that, they really get rid of a lot of nitrogen and phosphoric and fine dust. They clean our air, they clean our wastewater. And while they do it, they grow. And while they grow, they create energy. So you can take all those facets. And actually, this is a great example, project in Germany, in that building, a little bit of a funny building. But there's 22 families living here, 22 condos. There's triple pane windows in front of each apartment. There's algae in there. They take the sunlight and the CO2, and they grow, and they create enough energy and heat for this whole building. So when this was a first concept, they had a backfiring system, a generator, just in case it didn't work. But this is running for 7-8 years without any flaw, and the algae are creating all the energy needs that people need in this building. And more, because if they grow, you have to harvest them, and you can use it for a lot of different things, for animal feed, actually for people food. There's a lot of omega-3 in there. The algae are very popular in Japanese restaurants, so actually the quality of some algae and selling that is very high and a great business model. You can use it for cosmetics, for pharmacy, but you can also make biodiesel from it if you really like. So there's a lot of opportunities that create a business model where actually almost the energy in cities is free. That's another great thing. There's a new concept for this where the same system also is now built for 500 people at a time. And not just for the energy and what I just described, but they also clean all human waste in those buildings. More perfect than any other system. Actually, they also clean all antibiotics from the water. And it's the best drinking water you can get, apart from getting it from deep sources. And it's just a great product to have in cities. We'd really like to be involved in all those kind of new developments. The question is, can we take the must we change and the can we change into will we change? And that's a personal choice that's very important. I decided that I want to try and change. I'm totally imperfect in doing that. But I'll talk to you about some of our projects, and they might resonate in what we could do in Vancouver or in any other city. So this is a project that we did in the south of Holland, a former coal mining area. The coal mines were closed. The people were very depressed, 3 generations, 30% unemployment, a lot of social problems everywhere. The government gave something in return because the coal mining industry died. They decided to build the National Statistics Office there. That's what you see in this picture, a very large building. But then they found out that coal miners are not very good statisticians. So they had to ship them from the west to the south. People from the west didn't really want to live there. So it was really hard to maintain that. The building got empty in an area that was really impoverished, and it was really important to find new use for that. The government tried for many years to find this new use. Nobody dared to do it, and 2 weeks before they had to ask for a demolition permit, they asked us, can you come up with a solution? And then we said, okay, we will try. We came up with a solution. They gave us 6 months to make a business model for it, and then we started. Totally empty area. But we were really thinking about, okay, this was an office building. We need to do a lot of different things here. We call it functional accommodation. So food production went in there, new data centers, a lot of innovation companies that we wanted to draw, creatives, people that were making prototypes for the innovators. People were used to work with their hands, tried to get a new rooftop, think about new energy. And of course, it's a very old building, hard to get that done. But we really think about, first, where's the new economy? What is the economy of the future, and how can we capture that? What is the social structure around that? How can we implement that in a building? This is the way that we now think about all our projects. Think about social and economy first and see how we can capture that. And real estate is the last part of what's really interesting for us. But anything that we do here is also about, get more health here, get food here, try to include everybody. There's projects for refugees in all our projects. There's beehives in all our projects. We do a lot of things to really recreate an ecosystem around our project. We do a lot of carbon capture here, and if you look at the pictures here, there's little bits of everything everywhere, and we really believe in multifunctionality everywhere. I think that's where the future is, much more than how we used to plan a certain area where the factories are, a certain area where the schools are, areas where we live. I think cities need to be mixed use everywhere, and that's where the future is. We've become really good in creating what we call massive small, big groups of small businesses that do really well. And actually, when we started, everybody said those small businesses are unbankable, you can't do it. I can tell you after 7 years, now they will give our system higher cap rates than anybody else in the areas that we work in. So it also makes business sense. We also wanted to look at energy. When we got this building, we didn't have to pay that much for an empty building that was empty for 15 years. We still paid. But the first energy bill, I remember, was 1 million euros, natural gas. So that was a little bit of a shocker. The second one is, before we bought it, we were never able to go into this building because it was a national government building. So we had to do our whole business development and proposal based on just walking around. We expected that we would find 5 elevators inside, but there were 21, so there was a big energy use too. So it was very important for us to change our energy system. So around, we built big solar parks. On the roof, there's big solar. We have alternative energy systems there as well. But not just that. When you build that, we're also looking to find certain angles to capture rainwater better, to filter it ourselves, to build a biotope around that where we're better for food production, for insects, for birds, very successful in our place. And of course, we have pure sun energy, which means we can have also charge e-mobility from there, and not just charge our cars, but we can also have cars that you can take home so they can charge your house. So there's a lot of new developments in here. And one of the special things that we did here is we didn't build on steel, but on natural wood. And there's a whole social program that we developed with our partners in Cameroon for sustainable harvesting of the hardwood, but also making sure that they don't kill the forest for food. So we help them with education, with building farms, and all value-added industry was done in Cameroon, not where we are in Europe. So social programs, refugee programs around our projects are also very important. And did it work? It's a big project. It's about 600,000 square feet. When we started, there was nothing, no cars in the parking lot. After 3 years, there were 1,200 jobs inside. And now you have to wait until you can park your car. The value growth that you can see here was tremendous. We did better than any other project in the area. That's also why we get the higher cap rates. But I'm more proud of this graph is starting with the wrong energy, with the wrong materials, but we're almost down to 0 energy in an existing building. I saw a quote on one of the posters in the exhibition hall here from Dirt. The greenest building is the building that's already built. I think this is an example of that. If you really rethink what you can do with existing building, not demolish, not waste all the materials, but reuse them, I think we did a great job here. And I'm proud enough to say that if every building owner in the world would do what we did in our project so far, the climate problem would already be much less. We're imperfect enough, we're only small, so my impact is not that big, but our way of thinking might, help others to do the same thing. Because if I can do it, you can do it too. For us, if you really think about cities, it starts with the community. That's where I started too, community and collaboration. And from there, of course, we think about green buildings and green cities and circular economy. The social structure around that is even more important than the technical solutions. Without that social structure, the technical solutions will not survive. And that's what we discovered. But health, local food are important, to leave nobody behind. Think about mobility, water, energy, waste. We implement all of that in all our projects. We bring big groups of innovators together and local partnerships. And again, we say collaborate or die, because I think that's important in cities. Our latest project is a big project in Germany where, the steel industry and coal industry died, so they asked us for the same reason. It's a big area. It's about 200 hectares in the city. Part of that is what we're redeveloping. There's a big old steel factory here that we tried to reuse. I really love the mayor in this city. We have a great collaboration built. He was here last week to have an exchange with the city of Victoria and the city of Vancouver, also the BC government, federal government. His motto is, stubborn is the first step to sustainability. Well, stubborn is here, so if you really want to do things, you have to power through, and I really love that. So we tried to do something new in this steel factory and keep it, because it's also the history and the DNA of the place. It's a respect for the local culture. I was really thinking how to do this, and this is me. I'm just a CEO, lawyer, economist, so this is how I come up with ideas. But luckily, I have architects and people that really work with me. This is going to be the World Innovation Center. We hope to bring that to different cities. The German government is behind that. We really believe that we have to bring solutions together to have the access to innovations all over the world, because innovators don't have a deep market anywhere. They have to try and apply their inventions in any place in the world, and they have to sledge borders and certification systems and all kinds of other stuff. In average, it takes an innovator 7 years to go into another market. That should be 1 year, I think, if you really want to be effective. So very interesting for us. And actually, everything you see here, the blue panels is all solar-based, solar PV. So this is also a big energy machine for the whole area. I think this area will be taken off grids. We will create about 4,000 jobs. And the first sections look like this. A very great place to be, I think, and done with the same kind of thinking that I just explained in the other project. You know, with this, you know, the first keynote said, you know, we cannot have hope, we need to be fearless. I think, you know, I'm fearless maybe because of lack of knowledge. You know, people always say, you know, this guy doesn't know it can't be done, and that's why I do it. That's a little bit true, but, you know, I think we need to have radical hope. Radical means, you know, maybe against knowing better, we have to keep that hope and push forwards. You know, maybe there's something that will be smarter than ourselves. Maybe it's the youth that will be coming and know better and learn from us, maybe learn from our mistakes. But I also think that, you know, that swarm intelligence in cities is something that we don't use enough. You know, I think cities really have the capability of providing something for everybody. If everybody's involved. And it's not my intelligence. Again, this is also swarm intelligence from Jane Jacobs, who I used to work with a little bit, so that was a big honor. But I really believe that if we pull together, cities are smarter than ourselves, and cities will give us solutions that will really benefit into the future, because cities also have the critical mass where we can really make a difference. And, you know, we cannot sit back. Again, going back to Greta, you know, it is not good to do nothing. And that's also what Einstein said, you know, evil is not by doing evil, it's also mostly caused by doing nothing while you know there is a problem. For one, I really need to push forward and do things. We need to collaborate, because I'm only a small guy, so I'd like to collaborate with everybody. And then I'd like to talk about the last guy who really influenced me most. He is someone that grew up in certain circumstances, a little bit of Jewish background in the 30s and 40s in Holland, was not allowed to go to school, no formal training, but I've never known anybody that knew better to make decisions about wrong and right and good and bad. I've never seen him make one mistake, maybe because he didn't get to school, maybe because he didn't get to learn to talk as a lawyer or an economist. I call him Dad. He's very important for me. And he said always, you know, if you help one neighbor, you've helped them all. And that's how I'd like to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerben. I'd like to now call on Eric Asadurian from the World Watch Institute.
Thank you. That's the best anyone's ever pronounced my name, so thank you. I do have some slides. Hopefully those will come up. But it has really been amazing to be here this week and hear such an amazing set of talks. Thank you so much to Jenny Moore and to everyone on the Ecocity 2019 planning committees who made this week possible. As the many talks have shown us, eco-cities are possible, including the most recent. We have the knowledge to live sustainably in harmony with the earth and with each other. We can design cities around bicycles and walking and with public transportation. We can design buildings to be net zero or even net positive, and even with algae that can produce even more food and energy. We can integrate rooftop gardens and greenbelts surrounding cities to provide healthy food to residents, in theory. Yesterday, Richard Register noted that he's been working on eco-cities for a long time and they still haven't come about, right? There's an in theory piece here that we have to look at. Can we bring this eco-city future to fruition with the damage we've already committed, with the changes we've already locked in, with the global population growing to 9.5 to 10 billion people, with marketers still aggressively selling us the consumer dream, with the housing, transportation, and energy infrastructure that we've already locked into place and strangely continue to expand in spite of all the clear risks? Is there still time for an eco-city future? And that would be the point where I'd flip on slide 1. Still don't have those. But in 2013, the State of the World focused on, is sustainability still possible? And we invited science fiction author Kim Stanley Robinson to add his words. And he stole the show of this report with his final chapter called, Is It Too Late? Is it too late for a sustainability transition? And he said it so perfectly then that I just want to kind of go through that argument quickly. He said that's not the right question. In fact, the real question is, how much will we choose to lose? But that's too negative, he said, so let's reframe that positively. How much will we choose to save? It's now inevitable that the seas will rise, that fires will spread, that floods will wash away entire cities. But that doesn't mean the struggle is over. Thank you. So it was author failure right here, or my bad, sorry. So he wrote this chapter, Is It Too Late? And so, but that doesn't mean we have to give up the fight. The more we do now, the more livable, relatively speaking, the future will be. And maybe, this is the hope that drives me, maybe after the dust settles, we'll actually have been able to usher in a new civilization in balance with Gaia's rules and limits, not without a really uncomfortable transition, no matter how proactive we are now. But none of that is possible without a radical shift in how we live, what we value, how we organize society, economies, and the systems that underlie everything we know. In other words, we need to transform the dominant paradigm of human cultures. So just to be clear, because that was a lot of academies, a paradigm is an orienting pattern. And what the system thinkers, Dana Meadows, argued is the single most powerful leverage point in changing a system. Not regulating flows, not shifting goals of a system, but actually changing the pattern that underlies a system. And our dominant cultural paradigm is one of consumerism and boundless growth. We somehow need to transform that paradigm to orient on sustainability, on simplicity, on equity, and on sufficiency. And if we don't, we'll still eventually reorient on sustainability, but Gaia will lead the transition, and that type of transition will entail a lot more suffering. But are we up to it? Up to making such bold changes? The good news is that this scale of change has already happened. And I'm not referring to wonderful case studies like abolition or civil rights or even World War II mobilization. Those are important but too small in the scope. I'm talking about a far bigger transition. I'm talking about the conversion of humans from thrifty peasants to ravenous consumers. The consumer culture, the shift to the consumer culture started in the late 1600s with the colonization of the Americas, with the discovery of fossil fuels and the steam engine, and it just kept accelerating with flight, with chemical fertilizers, with antibiotics, with modern marketing and communications technologies, with computing now, with satellite technology. It's an exponential growth system. And these technologies unlocked an experiment in cultural engineering at a scale never tried before. In my work over the past decade at WorldWatch, I've explored this process of cultural transformation. And in the context of a modern society, it's driven by 6 societal institutions. That's government, business, education, media, and marketing, traditions, and social movements. These 6 work together effectively to shift cultures. Now, in the beginning, just to be clear, the cultural engineering that I'm talking about that brought us into a consumer reality wasn't as intentional as it is today. Right now, marketing companies or You know, the diaper industry, for example, will say, how do we spread diapers into China? And then systematically figure out, okay, who are the influentials? How do we supplement marketing with lobbying of the government, with shifting traditions, all that? In the beginning, it was simpler, right? People, entrepreneurs like Hosea Wedgwood, a door-to-door pottery salesman, realized that if he started changing annual designs of pottery, people would buy more pottery. Or store owners realized, if I make a really attractive window display, more people will come in, more people will buy stuff. If I use advertising in the local newspaper, I'll be able to sell more stuff. And those little innovations built on each other, right? Like a bacteria colony in a pond, those few little things weren't noticeable at first. But as it exponentially grew and took over that ecosystem, now we see consumerism everywhere. And it especially is aggressive now with the $700 billion spent each year on marketing each year. Now, because of where we are in the audience, I thought, okay, let's just pick one case study to talk about this spread. And so I want to look at not local food or green buildings, but I think again, Richard talked last night and kind of pointed out that without getting rid of the car, the Ecocity future is an impossibility. So let's look at how ingenious the auto industry has been in spreading this technology. Not this best technology. In the 1800s, trolleys were equitably accessible. They were spreading. Bicycles were starting to spread. And yet, how did this inefficient, dangerous, very expensive, prone to breaking down technology win the day? And you can go through those 6 institutions and look at how all the ways that they strategically used the 6 institutions effectively to spread the car. Right? We're all familiar with the kind of backroom lobbying and efforts, the political influence, the billions of dollars of marketing that continues today. But they were smarter than just those few strategies. Right? They went into schools and shifted children's understandings of the role of the road. Right? It's no longer for kids. It's unsafe to play in the street. It's dangerous. And that kind of, they started shifting spatial norms in children at the early age. They bought up entire trolley systems and dismantled them, replacing them, getting rid of their competitors specifically, and basically rebuilt the infrastructure around them. They were one of the most innovative, and I mean, most of you have probably heard of AstroTurf organizations, right? Fake grassroots organizations that propagate industry goals, right? And I thought that was a modern phenomenon, but actually the early auto industry worked with car clubs and citizens groups to get them to push their agenda in the social sphere, in the civil society sphere, specifically fighting the use of speed regulators and other things. They even worked on shifting the language, right? The term jaywalker was a industry-created term that was pushed to kind of denormalize the idea that pedestrians are an equal participant in streets. They even worked with police departments, local police departments, to arrest said jaywalkers, to really push it home, right? So that's it's diabolical at a level, right? But that's the level of strategy that's gone into transforming cultures around pretty much every industry and around every kind of norm. And we have to kind of think that strategically in our work, right? We can't just focus on changing city laws, right? We need to cultivate the civil society resistance and energy, of course, but we need to also get into schools. We need to work with businesses. We need to even change traditions and kind of that element that we often ignore, right? Even the automobile industry did something fantastic, which is create a new ritual, the Sunday drive, right? That was a strategic marketing plan to get people to go out and enjoy their car more. And it led to the creation of parkways, right? And all this new infrastructure to support all these people going out on Sunday picnics. So how do we do that, be that innovative in our efforts, right? And we could go through any case study. And that's my hope, is that you'll leave here with recognizing that, okay, I want to focus on local food. Well, let me go through those institutions and see how I'm not using all the tools in the toolbox. One simple example is the bicycle industry, right? How do we get rid of the car and replace that with pedestrians again and bicycles, right? And you can go through those 6 institutions with them. How do we get into schools again and teach children that the best mode of transportation is to walk and to bike? Training them in bicycle safety, working with school administrators to, to normalize the bicycle-based commute to school. How do we work with bike sharing companies to really drive that forward, or non-bike focused companies to get the bicycle commute normalized in their workplace and subsidized or supported somehow or celebrated? How do we work with city officials, of course, to strengthen the bike infrastructure and to limit the car-based normalcy, right? How do we create congestion taxes and, and increase fossil fuel taxes so that we put those new barriers? Or maybe at the same time, how do we subsidize the bicycle commute or create tax incentives? And on, going through those lists, right? How do we work with critical mass to engage them more directly with this newer youth climate activism, right? These are allies, and we often are siloized even in the activist world, not just in the academic world, focusing on our one campaign. But these all have ways to support each other. Even in traditions, how do we work with churches and synagogues and temples and mosques to get their adherents to come to service on their bicycles, right? And make that a celebrated way of caring for creation? Or how do we take the knowledge that was figured out so long ago by the automobile industry and put it on its head? How do we shift the Sunday drive to a Sunday ride and get people around the world going out with their families with a little picnic lunch on their bicycles and really driving the energy around bicycling? Now, that's not to focus overly on bicycles. That's just one battle in the quest to shift our culture to one focused on sustainability. But we have to ensure that we apply this kind of systemic change to every aspect of our lives: what we eat, where we live, how we spend our time, even things that are kind of taboo to talk about, how we die, how we're married, right? These are rituals that have a lot of influence and shape the worldview of so many people. If we're burying our loved ones filled with toxic chemicals under pesticide-laden fields, that says something very different than burying them naturally in a forest cemetery. The only way we change human behavior at the scale necessary to avert or at least moderate the growing sustainability crisis is to transform human cultures. And I admit that sounds icky. I was going to say Machiavellian, but icky is the right word. These strategies are being used every day by the sellers of the consumer culture. So not playing by these rules means we're going to lose. What we need to do, and do boldly and unapologetically, is to work to reset the globally dominant cultural paradigm, making sustainability feel completely normal and making consumerism feel taboo. But even then, will this be enough? Or is it simply too late? And what Stan Robinson left unsaid in his chapter, and probably because it's not a very comfortable thought, is that no matter what, changes are coming. The consumer culture will end. And the more work we do now reorienting the cultural paradigm from consumerism to sustainability, the more this new paradigm will be available to be picked up upon and expanded in the vacuum that comes with the failure of the consumer culture. rather than much worse models that could come out of the fear and disruption and lack of alternatives. And I should unpack that. Yes, the consumer culture will end. That's not even a discussion point anymore. It's inevitable, as it does not respect the inherent limits of the planet. In the brief window we have, we can dither, or we can start sowing the seeds for sustainable, relocalized societies that respect limits while providing for people's needs. But if we fail to plant these seeds, we may usher in a much worse future, one racked with planetary changes, where nationalists promise to put their own countries first and promise to harden borders to guard what we have from the growing hordes of undesirables that are running away from their disaster-stricken countries. Yes, so we may actually be further along in that dystopian scenario than we'd like to believe. But whether we succeed in time and usher in a sustainable eco-city future, or just sow the seeds for a post-consumer and more livable future that would have come at this point, the lesson is the same. The work of eco-city planners, environmental advocates, and educators, eco-entrepreneurs, grassroots climate organizers, and the entire sustainability community is essential and must carry on and become bolder and more oriented on truly transforming human cultures now and in the years to come, for the window to effect true and proactive change is closing. And inaction, or even timid action now, will mean Gaia will take the lead in shifting our cultures, our economies, our diets, our numbers, and our locations. And that will be a much worse scenario than us getting into the culture-changing business. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We now move into the panel phase, and we've got 4 presenters, each of which has 5 minutes. And I'd ask the presenters to please stay within that 5-minute frame. So the first person is Charlene Alec, the former councillor of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and the spokesperson for the Tsleil-Waututh Sacred Trust Initiative.
I stay here.
Do you want to speak from the table? You got slides?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Good morning. Simtalat Quana Squi Talitsin at Slewatach a Stalo Tamil Chiam Siamalaluch Taten Tiaktana Tamen Wananawite Tanishqualo Antony to E ta Ecocity Heightsep Awal Siam and Xiye ta panelists. Oh, hello, hello, oh, hello, hello, hela. Ha 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 hela ha hey. Heitzepawith, in my tradition, it is not only my right but my responsibility to pay respects to where I am, where my ancestors once hunted and once traveled and once harvested our medicines before this was a city. These are the territories of which my ancestors traveled and did that. In my greeting, I spoke in my language, introducing myself to this room and to all of the panelists as well as the attendees, and acknowledging that it takes all of our ancestors and all the things that they have done to align us to where we are right here, right now, but also giving respects and paying homage to that travel and that journey. I told you my ancestral name, in which I share with my grandmother, my late grandmother, but as well as my daughter. My English name is Charlene Alec. I am a former elected councillor with Tsleil-Waututh Nation. I'm working with my nation with the Sacred Trust Initiative, which is an arm of our Treaty Lands and Resources Department, and that is a department that overlooks any kind of referral that has to do with projects, businesses, or anything within our territory. Sacred Trust is an arm of that, and when a project came into our territory, we realized our sacred obligation to the land, the water, and the air, and most importantly to our people, needed a boost, and that's where the Sacred Trust Initiative was born out of. How we look at projects that come in to the territory is through the lens of, is it viable for the land? Is it viable for the water? Is it viable for the air? And most importantly, is it viable for our people and in the indigenous way of life that we would like to live and to partner with these projects? With that lens, if it doesn't pass any of that, then we ask for it to be modified or to be changed. The Sacred Trust Initiative looked at the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project and the risks that it would bring into our water. Tsleil-Waututh means people of the inlet, and we have a creation story of our first grandmother being born out of the salt water, and as well as our first grandfather being transformed from a wolf. And knowing these territories and the mountains and the hunting grounds and the inlet, we have that responsibility to protect that, because our connection to the water and the land is much different from what these projects are bringing in. We are well adaptive to change. My grandfather lived in a time where when he was born, it was bows and arrows and horses and carts to the time of the atomic bomb. So the change that has happened within our territory, even from one of my great-grandfathers hunting down a real well-known trail, which is now known as Robson Street. That change has seen vast changes from, taking just what you need and that minimal effect that you're going to have on the natural world, and giving thanks for that. And that change, it becomes a part of our thanks and our gratefulness for what we have and what Mother Earth provides for us and what she gives to us. I just want to say thank you to the keynote speaker at the beginning, Xiye and Wallace Ladis, Haichuk, to the panelists, and for the work that you do within our territory, but as well within your own communities. That important change is great work, and it really aligns with a lot of, where we want to be and how we want to be. And I really liked how the youth had mentioned, loving yourself and loving where you live. That's the Indigenous way of living. When you appreciate and give thanks, and that song that I shared in my opening is giving thanks to the land, to the trees, the rooted ones, even the wind, the wind that brings change, and to the sun that gives us that energy. When you have that great appreciation, and when you give thanks and you include yourself, your spirit, in that being grateful for where you are, it changes how you go about your day. It changes, your relationship with the natural world and to the people that are in it. And those are the types of systems that I believe and that I'm firm about living my life, and how I hand down to my children and my grandchildren is you give thanks and you be grateful and you love where you live, and imply that to everything that you do and everything that you say. And if you go about that, and your transactions will become a little bit different. Your things that you do and that you buy and how you travel become a little bit different when you pay homage to that, all the living beings and in the natural world. And it's hard, when I come into the city and it's a total opposite of, it's not paying homage to all the natural beings, and it seems to be last on the list. So if I could put that call out to action is to, start being grateful for all the natural world and loving yourself and loving where you live, we would see a big change, over time in the impacts that it would have when you put the natural world first and foremost. Haitsapawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. I want to call now on Ben West of E-Democracy Solutions and Elephant in the Room.
Oops, that's not my first slide. That's an interesting slide to start on, but it's not my first one. There you go. Before I start, I just want to, first of all, give my respect, gratitude, appreciation for the Coast Salish First Nations whose territory we're on today, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Squamish, and in particular to my friend Charlene Alec, who I've really had the pleasure and honor of working alongside for many years, and I'm very happy to be on this stage with you today. Also to thank you to all of you, to be here on a weekday morning early talking about climate change and these issues. This is the choir here, but talking to the choir is important because it's the choir that does the singing, and without you we won't reach the congregation, the rest of us who need to be engaged. The slide that I'm sharing with you here was actually inspired by Catherine Hayhoe, the climate scientist, and really one of the most talented speakers, I think, reaching beyond the choir. And I think it tells a stark story. What you see in the yellow is people in the United States who are worried about global warming. It's a majority. If in Canada, that number goes as high as 87% of the population who sees climate change as one of the biggest issues facing us. And I would guess that this looks very similar elsewhere around the world. What is interesting is the stark contrast of the second slide, which shows the estimated percentage of adults who think global warming will harm them personally. And as you can see, there's a big shift. There's at least 20% there who are concerned about climate change but don't think it affects them. And I could tell you that that number has actually increased. If you look at this Yale climate opinions map over the years, that number of people who understand the impacts on them has grown. But we still have a long way to go. And to me, this is one of the key obstacles that we have in our work of trying to make change a reality. If people don't truly understand the urgency, don't understand the connection to themselves, we won't have the political will, we won't have the social license to move forward with the scale of change that's necessary. I could have shown you another slide which showed the amount that the average Canadian is willing to spend on taking action on climate change. It's less than the cost of a Netflix account for a month. So even with the overwhelming majority of the population of our country feeling this is one of the biggest issues that we face, we don't understand the urgency, and we aren't necessarily prepared to put the resources behind the solutions that are required. And unfortunately, a lot of our time and energy is spent debating, whether we should have a carbon tax or whether we should have a particular policy. And I think fundamentally that's because we really don't understand that we don't have a choice. This slide, I think, actually builds well off of my colleague from the World Watch Institute's comments about the role of marketing. I have to say that when I was working on this slide deck with a good friend of mine, Tara, who's the co-founder of this group Elephant in the Room, I felt somewhat uncomfortable with some of these slides that I was about to show you. And her point to me was, is it an emergency or not? If we truly understand that we're in the midst of an emergency, we all have to get used to being a little bit uncomfortable with the way that we're talking to people in our communities and our networks. What this is a series of reasonably effective ads in the anti-smoking movement. And I think this is important because it's using the tools of marketing to try to affect not just individual behavior, and that of course was part of it, but really cultural norms. Our understanding of cigarettes and, not just whether we smoke them or not, but the people around us and whether, people are exposing us to harm and danger. I show this too because I think this is actually one of the fundamental things that's missing in our movement right now is the effective use of the same kind of communications tools that have been used in campaigns like those around smoking. And I think it's notable as well because if you look at the work of Naomi Oreskes, there's a lot of similarities in the activity of folks in industry who have tried to get in the way of change. The book Merchants of Doubt and the great Netflix movie that you could watch as well. There is a lineage of these tactics and strategies to try to undermine our understanding of this threat. So this really is not happening in a vacuum. There are forces at play trying to ensure that we maintain the status quo. One little thing that I've been involved in and I see is happening is a growing movement towards trying to communicate these risks to people in a way that's using these tools. The images that you see before you, you may have seen in your Twitter account or in posters around the venue. These are actually all things that have gone up as billboards and social media ads at various times in various locations across the country. And not just kind of blanketed, but in very particular and strategic locations at particular moments. For example, the one that references being stuck in traffic was placed along the side of the 401 for people who would be stuck in traffic to look at and think about while stuck in traffic. The one that is related to somebody on an ice rink and imagining that melting, the experience of a Canadian not being able to play hockey, we put that outside of hockey arenas in various locations around Canada. We need to be using the techniques that have been used so many times before to help increase ecological literacy in our society. And I'll end by kind of adding to what my colleague Gerben there said around the word oikos, or household in ancient Greek. If we only look at our economy, the management of the household, and not our ecology, the study of the household, we're managing something without understanding it. And I believe that one of the biggest obstacles we have to moving forward is that we're fundamentally not ecologically literate as a society. And as we engage our populations around the kind of change that's necessary, I believe we all have a role to play to help people see the world through that new lens, to help make that kind of cultural shift. And I want to thank you all again for being here today. We all have to get a little bit more uncomfortable to make these kinds of changes a reality.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to now call on Jeff Cross, the Vice President of Planning and Policy at Translink.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, share the stage with some really great thinkers and activists, and at this time to be pushed, actually, I think is essential too. We can sit in our offices remotely and try and plan for the public good, but not be attached enough to what does the public good look like. And I've rewritten my response 14 times, I think, during the panel. So I'd like to focus my time a little bit on really the response to the the call to action from Veronica, Allison, and Xiye at the beginning. And what are we thinking? What am I thinking about? What are we thinking about at Translink as we provide advice? Really about the urgency about what we're doing. And, you know, from the starting point, I'd like to say as a bureaucrat, I hold it clear and dear that our role is to provide fearless advice. We don't make policy, we help develop policy. We tell people what we think, and then they tell us what to do, and hopefully it's in that order, but not always. But we need to bring really good advice to bear on these issues. And so as we look at adapting or coming up with a new long-range plan, which I think you've heard a bit about over the course of the last few days, Transport 2050, which we are doing with our sister organization, Metro Vancouver, which Jerry is representing, we need to be thinking about who we're planning for, and that's very difficult as a 50-year-old white man sitting in an office in New Westminster. And so making sure that the processes, the people that are involved are responsive to who it is that we represent. So we are going to great lengths, and we need to be constantly pushed to think about how we're measuring this and the metrics that we're bringing forward. So I think in the past we've not done nearly a good enough job at that. We just think of the population writ large. We don't really necessarily look at what the outcomes will be, whether it be by gender, which we know in my particular business that your gender really dictates how you travel, what your patterns are. Do the transportation systems that we provide equally meet the needs of a mother of a couple of children, or somebody that's working shift works at night, as it does for a commuter in a traditional vocation? Does it respond to income levels? Does it respond to your ethnicity and your demographic backgrounds? We're a city, obviously, of immigrants with very different behavioral value systems as they come in here. We have our First Nations roots. 45 different First Nations used this gateway traditionally over the time, and now even more as such. So how do we kind of instill those values? So we're spending a lot of time and effort and trying to engage the community to make sure that those voices are heard more effectively through this process. It's not easy. I think that we tend to privilege the voices that are creating that plan at the time, and all of those people that are in public service tend to be of a certain age and demographic, and so it takes extraordinary efforts for us to go out there, I think, and bring those voices in a meaningful way and not overly bureaucratically kind of condense it into stats and figures. So to really get stories told as part of this. Creating that urgency, I think, is really important, and that's why I believe this is a wonderful time. This conference is great. The youth climate strikes, I think, are really creating a new lens by which we think about not just what does this region look like in Transport 2050, but what are the things that we need to do in the next 1, 2, and 3 years to start to get us on the right path, both for taking on responsibly our role in mitigation and adaptation. And it's not easy. We've recently published what's happened over the last 5 years. We see some great things happening in this region around walkability. But it's not fast enough. You know, in the last 6 years, we saw an increase, almost a doubling of walking, so a 3% increase in the share of people that are walking. We have really strong land use patterns in this region, but every time that we approve a development that's not close to cycling, walking, or transit or jobs, those will be entrenched for the next 50, 100 years. So I think we need to be looking both at Transport 2050 and beyond, and then recalibrating to the investment decisions and policy decisions that we're making today and tomorrow. So I've used my time, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to now call up Jerry Dobrovony, the General Manager of the Engineering Services of the City of Vancouver, and now moving on to the Chief Administrative Officer of Metro Vancouver. Jerry.
Thank you, David. Well, I was sitting there listening, and it's been an amazing session, an amazing week, and I'm thinking I'm the last speaker at the end of a very full week, the last speaker on a very full, long panel. What's left to say? Well, first, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we thank you very much. I worked at, well, you heard 2 hours ago in the introduction, I was at the city for over 30 years. And in the 90s, I worked with Walter Hardwick, who was a great thinker. And his work went back into the 60s and 70s. And something he said is a message I'd like to leave you with now, was that he said, you know, we know what to do. We've known for decades. We just need to do it. We just need the courage and the commitment to do what we know is right. And I don't start that way to trivialize the challenge, but we've talked a lot about the challenge. We've talked a lot about the urgency. I start this way because I want there to be a message, a positive message of hope. I worry sometimes when we're with the next generation that all they hear is the urgency and the challenge, and sometimes that can seem insurmountable. We know what to do. We've known for decades. We just need the courage to do it. In the 90s, we did a transportation plan in Vancouver. Vancouver in the 70s had 90% of its trips by driving. And so the 96 transportation plan said, look, we don't want to build a city that's dominated by the car. All the growth that's going to come, and we want there to be growth in population and jobs and trips. All that growth we want to be through walking, cycling, and transit. So that was in 96, that was approved. And guess what? Since then, more than just the growth, there's been actually a reduction in car trips since the 90s. And now over half the trips in Vancouver are by walking, cycling, and transit. Remember, in the 70s, 90% were by car. So then we hosted the Olympics in 2010, and we very intentionally said, well, that's an opportunity to do an experiment. During a big event like that, you have a third less roadway because of closures. You have almost a doubling of trips, a massive increase in the number of trips. So it was a glimpse of the future. What could the future look like? So we used the Olympics as an opportunity to test the future. We treated our downtown core as a laboratory. And we decided that we liked it. We more than doubled the number of walk, bike, transit trips during the games. The city functioned beautifully, and the system didn't grind to a halt. So now our new transportation plans, I said we're over 50% now, is 2/3 of our trips by walk, bike, transit. Originally that was for 2040, but now our council has passed a climate emergency and is really pushing staff to do better, do it faster. There is urgency, and now those goals have all been moved 10 years sooner to 2030. David Cadman was part of a council that drove staff hard in those days to do better, do it faster, and those messages aren't lost. And it's really important now as we see these demonstrations and celebrations globally by the next generation to push not only staff but politicians to do better, do it faster, and do it now. I've moved on to Metro Vancouver now, which is the regional district. It's the 21 municipalities and First Nation and electoral areas. It's 2.5 million people. And we're updating the regional growth strategy. And again, it's not rocket science. The growth strategy is put people where there's people, put jobs where there's jobs, and keep green what is green. Protect those areas. It's not rocket science. We need to do it faster. We need to do it better. We need to add more green space now as we increase urban canopy. We reduce heat islands. We pay attention to equity because we're having some of our most difficult areas in sections where people are most vulnerable. But again, just one last thing I wanted to mention was gender and intersectional lens. When we look at how we do all of our work, a few years ago we were pushed on gender, and we were asked to do a better job with our parking lots in Vancouver, our parkades. They were dark, they were dingy, and people didn't feel safe in them, especially women didn't feel safe going into these dark parking lots. So we changed the lights, we made them bright, we painted them, and guess what? They became safer, but we started making a whole bunch more money by people using our parking lots as opposed to everybody else's parking lots, because it turns out not only women want to feel safer, men want to feel safer too. Who knew? And so revenues went up, and so using a gender and intersectional lens on your work, looking at climate and at equity in all the work you do, every single project, every single day, makes sense. It's the right thing to do, and it's the only way we're going to get through this awful mess that my generation and the generation before us has created. So thank you. It's been a great week, and thank you very much.
Want to switch here? Sure, I'll go up there. Thank you, Jerry. We were supposed to have 15 minutes of questions. Unfortunately, we are at, okay, I'm getting direction. 5 minutes of question, and then you're going to have to wolf your coffee. So, 15-minute break. Okay, so there are microphones 135 and 246. Yes, microphone 3.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Beth. I'm a fourth-generation settler that was welcomed by the Musqueam people near or around what you folks will know as Edmonton in Alberta. I would like to make an observation that our young women made calls to action. I'm 49. I remember when I was 19 and the older adults told me that action would be taken and it didn't happen. So I would like to invite the young women who each only had 5 minutes in a panel that took almost 2 hours, how we are woefully, in our way of meeting that is very masculine, really underprivileged the voice of the young women. So the two that are here and our gal that called in, please yell and scream at us older people and do what you're doing, because otherwise we don't listen. And I'd like to shine a light on the format that we're in, how we are very much people who look like me, and we're privileging ourselves by the price it took to be here, by the format that we're in, and we need to change this up. And once again, I made a comment the other day, and I ended it with modeling that I know that was not a question, and I also know that we are all up for disruption, and this is one of the things we need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Microphone, somebody, you're coming to 3? Okay.
Right. I made a question or a statement yesterday which didn't get any reaction. Here's a panel that wants to look for answers and solutions. Here is an answer and solution that's being patented right now by the USPTO, okay? This is designed mainly for Asia, where new cities are needed the most. Right here is the cities that you are asking about, that you are describing, and it's packaged together by a systems design. It has 3 different levels of both economic, sustainability, and ecological mitigation. It's everything. But how many people are really ready for the answers and are ready to listen? There's a lot of questions, but not too many solutions. Here it is. I'd like to talk to you all. Thank you.
So you now have 15 minutes for your refreshment break. It's out that door and to the right. On your behalf, I want to thank Xiye, Gil, Veronica and Allison, Gerben, Eric, Charlene, Ben, Jeff, and Jerry. And I want to announce to you that the Eco-Sustainability Trivia winner is Kira Gil Maher. And the leaderboard winner is Robin Harder, and you can pick up your prize at the registration desk. So thank you all for being patient. Sorry we couldn't get to more questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference and go back home and make a difference. Thank you. Nice to see you again.